When we were in graduate school, everybody was intending to become a professional teacher. They were getting a PhD to then go work in a university and have that career. Now, we're doing something very different now. What we're doing is teaching Tibetan who folks who want to learn more about the philosophy of liberation from Tibetan sources. Uh, we have, well, over the years, particularly when I've done summer intensives, there would be one or two students who actually wanted to go to graduate school, or perhaps were in graduate school in Buddhist studies, or they were going into graduate school that fall, but they were out of sync with their new university, where they were going to be starting second year and they had to pick up first year. Uh, so I always have gotten some students that could have a trajectory kind of like mine, but the vast majority of them are not going to become professional translators. They're not going to become professional scholars. They have a personal interest in Buddhism that they would like to deepen by the ability to read the texts their Tibetan teachers are teaching them in the original Tibetan. So this is a a small set of the folks who are interested in Tibetan Buddhism. Only a small number of them would be wanting to actually learn the language. But with changing times, see, it used to be you had to be physically where I was for me to teach Tibetan. The summer Tibetan institutes that I've had, I've done in upstate New York, in California. I did them for 6 years here in Portland, and you had to physically come here for the summer. Uh, Now, most people can't take the summer off. They just can't do that. And even if they could devote a bunch of time, they can't physically go to a different part of the world. But now that all of our classes are on Zoom, we're open to a greater number of students. So you could say, well, almost nobody wants to do what you're teaching. And I would say, yep, that's right. That's the way it goes. But they don't, it's easy for them to get this education now. Uh,
Right. Well, it would be a good idea if you say a bit about who is the Dharma from?
mm,
Where does it come from? Who are
mm.
you? Why should I trust you? How do you know this stuff?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know this stuff and don't trust anyone. Let's just start with that. Okay. Always look at the evidence. Okay. You could say in the fall of 1978, me, Jules Levinson, and Dan Kozort started the 4 years of Tibetan at the University of Virginia's graduate program. And we had, well, actually, there were 11 people in the class until the first midterm. And after the first midterm, there were three of us for the next 4 years. Uh, and that's where Jules and I started learning our Tibetan. Now, Jules went on and got his PhD at UVA. I wanted to try cases, so I went to law school and then was a public defender for 7 years. Uh, I was very interested in seeing what kind of evidentiary showing is necessary to change someone's mind, change them from thinking one thing to thinking something else, which is really central in the Buddhist philosophy of liberation. And I could say, like, well, there's no debate tradition really in America yet. So the closest we can get to is is a courtroom where there's always somebody with you who's saying everything you're saying is wrong and trying to convince a third party what they're thinking is right. Uh, so I found that very useful. in evaluating the kind of philosophic discourse that goes on in Buddhist philosophy. If you've got a textual system, basically what you're doing is expanding or contracting precedent based on exigent circumstances. Okay, well, Nagarjuna said this. Well, he never really directly addressed this topic. Does it apply in the same way? Does it apply in a different way? So I find that uh, the skills that I did in those years definitely informed my ability to learn systematic philosophy. Uh, but enough of that is enough of that. So after 7 years, I had enough of being a lawyer. Uh, and our family moved up to where Bill McGee was living. Now, Bill went through the Tibetan program after me and Jules. We were never in classes at the same time, but it was the same program, uh, even with the same teachers, but we were just not classmates together. Uh, so we moved up, my family moved up to Ithaca, New York, where uh, the monastic college that has worked for Dalai Lamas for a long time, Namgyal Monastery, had set there. And Bill had finished all his coursework, and he was getting a lot of translation experience translating for the geisha who was teaching at Namgyal. And he was really overworked. And he asked me literally the next day after getting to Ithaca to start teaching the beginning Tibetan class for him. Uh, now, Ithaca was home to uh, Snow Lion Publications, who we're good friends with, Sid Pyburn, and all those wonderful folks. Uh, they had just published Joe Wilson's Translating Buddhism from Tibetan, like days before. And Bill handed me Willie's book and said, "Hey, look, here's Willie's book. He's got something with verbs in there. Look into it." So I started seeing that the arrangement of the book, the presentation of declension and the presentation of patterns that we'll see in verbs that he has in his appendices would be really useful. That's a good way to teach. So I started teaching the class using that. Now, meanwhile, at the University of Virginia, the head of the College of Arts and Sciences had made a rule change so that all graduate school level languages are taught first year in its entirety over the summer. They always had to have a first year intensive in the summer that did first year. So that included Tibetan. So Tibetan had to do first year in the summer. Now, Bill McGee had been doing that for a couple of years already. 2 years anyway, maybe three, when we got Wilson's book. And that year, when he went back to Charlottesville for the summer, he used the Wilson appendices for the first time for a summer intensive. Okay. So he had gone back, and his family had gone back to Charlottesville. And remember, to study Tibetan with someone, you had to be standing next to them. So he was teaching that in Charlottesville. So I started doing the same thing in Ithaca. And people would come from California. I mean, they'd come from all around. Uh, it was weird. You could put a an advertisement in the Snow Lion newspaper, and everybody in North America that was interested in Tibetan Buddhism would know about it. It was the only source. Okay, so that went on for a while, and then there was a benefactor to UVA, an alumni of UVA who helped at the school a lot, uh, and he had a uh, a big estate outside of town with a bunch of residences, and he was kind of an explorer himself. And he said that if we wanted to put on our own Tibetan program, he would provide places for us to live and a place out there to put on the courses. So Bill called me up in Ithaca and said, "Hey, look, we can do two at once. This one is can be free. We don't have to have to charge tuition. The UVA one had some serious tuition for it. Uh, so I came down there, and uh, the difference between the two schools quickly fell apart because the same students, we realized, well, the same students would come to the same classes. So Bill taught in the morning, I taught in the afternoon, and all the ones from in town who were officially in the UVA class came out to the Dharma farm, which is what we were calling it. And Bill was living out there in the afternoon. And we just had a great summer doing that. Um, Now, we had not yet even seen among ourselves that a lifelong pattern was happening, but the lifelong pattern had already started happening. So, after a bit, one of Bill's students, Paul Hackett, who, after doing his 4 years at UVA, went up to Columbia and finished up there with Bob Thurman, doing more Sanskrit stuff. He and Bill did some things, Dharma Farm things, in summers in upstate New York, I know. And then Bill became the headmaster of a high school in Taos, New Mexico at one point. Uh, and we did a Dharma farm out there in Taos one summer at the Yachi school. Uh, I mean, there are a lot of these. I keep, after a while you forget them. Uh, oh yeah, okay. Then Jim Blumenthal. Jim Blumenthal got his PhD in Buddhist studies at the University of Wisconsin with Geshe Sopa. And Geshe Sopa used to have a summer program at his monastery outside of town every summer. Uh, and I went out one summer when he was teaching the special insight of Tsongkhapa's great exposition of the stages of the past. And that's where I met Jim Blumenthal. And we got to be good buddies immediately. And after he graduated, Yangtze Rinpoche, who had been out at Geshe Sopa's monastery for a long time, started Maitripa College in Portland. And when Jim got his doctorate, he came to Oregon and he was teaching at the University of Oregon and Maitripa. And he always asked me, he knew about the intensives that Bill and I did, and he asked me to come out to Maitripa and start doing it there. And I finally was able to, in I think 2010, and I did it from 2010 to 2016, I think. Meanwhile, Bill's doing it in different places. Bill is doing these in Italy. He's doing it in a bunch of places. I'm sorry, I just don't know all the places. He was still doing the same stuff in other places. I don't know how long he did it at UVA, a long time. Uh, and then I needed surgery on my hips, and I couldn't do the classes. So I convinced Bill to come out to Portland, and he picked up at my I either 2016 or 2017. He was doing it then. Uh, and then during the pandemic, we decided, okay, well, everything's online, so we should just do what we've always been doing online. Uh, so we've just kicked it in since then.